Gray drizzle frets on the palace steps. Rushes are tacky with last night's wine and whatever else got spilled while people pretended their jokes were petitions. Courtiers test their masks the way fishermen test knots, tight enough to hold, loose enough to breathe. The throne sits taller than it needs to on a dais that creaks when the tiny king shifts. A rail runs like a low fence between crown and clamor. A string of carved lions who have forgotten how to be dangerous. You're the newest chamber warden's helper on hush watch. Stake bag on your hip, a coil of bench cord in your hand, a sanded tally slate tucked under your arm, a pot of red ochre that will make friends or enemies depending on your wrist. If you like watching a joke turned into quiet law without anyone needing to draw steel, walk with me. Tap subscribe and ring the bell. We'll set a chord that makes listening matter and finds that teach men to fear shame more than boredom. Orders are plain because their consequences aren't. Peg a hush cord from throne to petitioner's rail. Hang the board, hear first, sigh later, where elbows must read it to sit. Check the roll. Post the decree, yawning find a tea court. A page with linen cuffs, 2 clean mutters for bravery, yawns are honest. The tiny king, feet barely reaching the rung, points his staff at a lord who cost an hour last week, snorting audibly through a tax plea. Make listening matter, he says. You kneel and chalk the first line across the rushes. Peg taps, tap tap, turn, tap. The woolen hush cord runs like a quiet river between dais and rail, shallow arc at the turn where temper likes to pool. Cord too near and pride cheats. Men lean across it and make the king's patience about other people. Cord too far and courage spills into noise. The hush becomes theater. Either way, the line must be up before the hush horn's low-note peals speak. You pull slack smart, set pegs at ankle depth, seams, not fences, and make the cord hum without singing. Rail, the surgeon says, palm already on a peg. He rams one home with a hand that has learned to measure without shouting. You walk the dais edge and plumb the rail, post to post, eye to groove, until the lions look like they mean it. You stamp footing from petitioner's line to throne so the first mouth doesn't stumble into apology. Then paint the first chalk ring at 2 paces from the rail, another at the rail itself. You paint here first, sigh later on the board where hands fetch cloaks. A fan tips and a spray of feathers spits down the hush lane. You catch the stick with 2 fingers and return it with a face that says less than words do. Linen cuffs still too clean. You tie a red thread round the fan's rib, a private warning, then knot a mint sprig to the board's nail, for dry mouths, not for noise. A bag of mint waits under the plank for people who will blame fines on thirst if you let them. Hidden worlds live under your bracers. Last winter's barred mockery list, no laughing at stammers, no yawning as a reply, no goat jokes that end with someone's mother. A spare sack of mint for tongues that want to be useful. Hand signs, 2 fingers down, step, flat palm, hold, fist low, down. Pocket drill you'll teach to a mouth about to embarrass a spine, set feet, breathe, speak. The hush horn peals its low request, the staff raps once for measure kept. You feel the tiny king's eye drop to your cord hand and remain there long enough to give your knuckles manners. You loosen the curve at the left peg, a thumb's worth, where the rushes are slick with secrets. He notices. He says nothing. That is permission here. You chalk a quiet seam from petitioner's line to the throne. 2 boot-width dots of ochre where story must pause and grammar begin. You tie a small tag to the first peg, fine. Yawn equal to 1 vinegar coin, snort equal to 2, stage sigh equal to 3 plus mint. The usher grins where no one can see it. The page with the clean cuffs reads it twice, then pretends he can't. Roll, the usher says. You scrape yesterday's names and write today's in a hand even tired eyes can trust. Mullion, fish levy, Lisa, bridge toll, Tor, shore grant, merit, widow's plea. You leave 3 blank lines. The day will invent them soon enough. The first petitioner sets toes on the chalk ring 2 paces back. She's a widow in a cloak that used to belong to a husband. I speak, she says, and the hush horn obliges. Bridges took his cart, Tolman took his coin, King takes my hour if your lord keeps sighing. She doesn't look at the lord who cost last week, she looks at the cord. The lord's fan feathers twitch by habit, your palm floats. Down. He obeys. A yawn rises in the second row like a trout. You see it before anyone hears it, jaw loosening, shoulder lift, hand too slow. You point with the staff without turning it into theater and then, quietly, so the king doesn't have to, wrap the hushed peg beside the man's knee. Measure kept, not broken. He presses mint against his tongue as if humility were an herb. You notch a tick on your slate under yawns, 1 and under fines, 1 vinegar. The usher's purse owns little coins that will buy vinegar for ink and vinegar for pride. You hope to spend both. A page mutters again. Yawns are honest, but he mutters it in the seam, and the seam eats it. You chalk a small ring around his boot where it stands. Wait. He reads it. He waits. The tiny king's hand relaxes on the staff's knotwork. Listening might yet be cheaper than noise. Facts become sounds. Peg taps in rushes. Red ochre drying on board. The hush horn's low command. The staff's small thunder when measure keeps itself. The wool hush chord's soft complaint when pride leans and learns better. Linen cuffs whisper when someone remembers their hands before their mouth. You log. Speakers, 1. Yawns, 1. Fines, 1 vinegar. Staff wraps, 2. You add mint issued when you leave a sprig on the board for a man whose jaw was honest, if not timely. The usher will call it kindness. The book will call it policy. A provost appears with a small book that would like to be a conscience and boots that would prefer tile to rush. Inspection, he whispers, eye on the cord like the word makes lines true. Let him through and you stir gossip. They're cooking the count. Bar him and he leaves with the same sentence salted to taste. Either way, the tide of cases won't wait. You chalk a thin line across the seam with the staff's ferrule, threshold only, and hand him your fine slate. Posted, read, vinegar first. He leans, sees dew, chalk, not theater, and becomes furniture. 2 benches swap places. Habit outruns instruction. You redress the ring in shadow while a lantern crawls closer, a sleeve tug, a palm down, a quiet hold for the one who thinks volume counts as measure. The cord stays true. The widow doesn't have to repeat herself. The tiny king's decree, no yawns at court, is painted where elbows can't miss it. A courtier with a mouth like a trout tries to test it with an opera sigh. The staff raps once, twice, measure kept, and you point to the board with 2 fingers. He studies the numbers, he buys mint, he discovers he can live with water. Hidden lists live under your coat. The barred mockery sheet gets a thumb. No calling the king small today, no counting his inches in the same breath as you count your coins. Your spare mint makes 3 friends. Your chalk finds fine, stage sigh, 1 silver, paid, promissory, Lord Elm. Your slate forgives your sarcasm and keeps the line straight. The hush horn peals its second note for the next plea. The cord hums with attention, not appetite. The staff waits for its rap. The tiny king clears his throat and remembers to ask a question. The widow's knees loosen. A page fetches vinegar coins like a priest brings water. Useful, not fancy. If it were your hall, if a page said yawns are honest, how close would you set the hush cord at first light, nearer for bite or wider for safety? Put your vote and where you're watching from below. I read them when the ochre flakes from my knuckles, and the hush horn asks whether the cord belongs on the rushes again. You walk the seam once more. Pegs sit like tame teeth. The cord holds without being pulled. The board says what it must. The mint bowl is less full, and so are 5 men's pockets. The tiny king's feet find the rung. The usher's stylus whispers totals. The horn says speak. You breathe. You let someone else do it the way the line taught them. Set feet, breathe, speak. The rest of the morning can argue about taxes. Your job was to make it argue without sighing. Dew settles on the rushes and decides this floor is its kingdom. The hush cord is cold in your palm. Pegs knock a little tune your wrist knows by heart. Routine is the law that teaches courage to stay civil. Before sun, peg the lane. Tap, tap, turn, tap. Run the cord true. No swales for pride to pull in, no proud humps for stories to trip over. Chalk the rings. 1 at 2 paces from the rail for mouths that think volume is weight, 1 at the rail for hands that need a place to stop. Stamp the footing from petitioner's line to throne so the first sentence steps on confidence, not luck. At the horn, petitioner speaks, reply, hush. At the mark read, post yawn count, paste to fines. At lull, swap frayed hush strap for waxed, Saturday slack died last winter, dry strap first keeps hands from blaming weather for their tremble. You string a laundry rope between uprights to air spare cloaks, nobody gets to say cold made them rude. You draft the rota in chalk along the plank, hush staffs forward, one per seam to wrap measure kept into elbows. Mint bearers to lanes, sprigs for dry mouths, not for sport. Reserves to the rear bench to widen on order. They will pretend boredom now and be grateful when boredom becomes space. Your job sits on your knuckles. Set the speaking sequence. Tie colored threads on staves where a glance will do the work of a speech. White for petition, blue for oath answer, yellow for water pause. Your ledger opens and learns 4 verbs again: pegged, heard, hushed, set by. The usher's stylus whispers them into wax like numbers or talismans. Peg taps, the hush chord hums. Wax blocks thud as straps are rubbed sensible. The horn peels its low mark, breath before speech, the note that gives truth a spine. The day pretends it is learned. It isn't. The provost arrives with a small book that wants to be a conscience and boots that prefer tile to rush. Inspection, he says, rehearsed, eyes on the cord as if his word makes straight lines. Let him through and you stir gossip. They're cooking the count. Bar him and he leaves with the same sentence, salted to taste. Either way, the tide of cases won't wait. You draw a peg tip across the seam, threshold only, and hand him your fine slate instead, posted, read, vinegar first, you say. He leans, finds dew and chalk and no theater, and becomes furniture without suing for a roll. Some morning always tips an ink pot. Today, it chooses your fines book. You jam your wrist under the flood and save the page that counts. Petition, reply, yawn ticks, coins owed. 3 lines drown. Your head writes them back while your hand blots and your mouth moves 2 benches with finger signs, step, hold, down. So the cord stays an idea instead of a rope. 2 benches swap places. Habit outruns instruction. You redress the ring in shadow while a lantern crawls closer, half files trade, a sleeve tug, a palm down. The cord remains true. The hush keeps pretending it planned this. At the horn, the first petitioner steps to the chalk ring 2 paces back. I speak, she says, and does. The reply lands where the rail tells it to. A yawn blooms in the corner like a trout. You wrap the peg near the knee, not the skull, and point at the mint. Yawn count, 1, fine, 1 vinegar. Mint issued. The tally slate forgives your neatness and keeps liking its numbers. A friar palms you a chit from the alderman, wax confusing Polish for law. Opened by order, the face claims. Near a cord for a certain bench, the whisper means. You put it in the drawer that kills paper gently and tie a yellow thread on the weed nearest his memory as a private joke your conscience approves. Dry strap first. You hear from 3 benches you weren't near. A good rule travels without you having to carry it. You rub the hush strap where a hand sweated panic onto it, and the strap remembers how not to squeal when you tug it. Corruption dresses up as convenience. A porter offers extra heads closer seats to a lord with a mouth like a trout. Your look does the arithmetic he refuses. He learns subtraction. A cousin waves a folded open by order for nearer cord. The seal smells like pocket. You flatten it under your palm until it remembers paper is furniture, not command. The second, secret slate in your coat burns like a small coal. 3 lords who never pay water pause. You erase 1 name because last night he took yellow before his 3rd round, without testing your patience. The other 2 you carry into tomorrow, like a thorn you intend to pluck when you've earned the grip. Horn for mark. Hush rides it down the lane. A page tests, but yawns are honest in a seam that eats it. The tiny king's staff raps once for measure kept. You post the yawn count at the mark read, not to shame, but to keep the math from wandering. Fines owed, names written in a hand even proud eyes can trust. Vinegar coins clink like discipline finding its purse. If the provost wanted inside the cord to quiet rumor, would you let him inside inspection, or keep him threshold only? Put your vote and where you're watching from below. I read them when the ochre flakes from my knuckles, and the hush chord asks whether it belongs on the rushes again. By mid-morning, the routine has trained the room. Pegs sit like tame teeth. The chord hums with attention, not appetite. The board says, "Hear first." Sigh later in letters elbows can't ignore. The fines slate fills at a pace that buys vinegar for ink and pride for free. You scrawl your 4 verbs one last time. Pegged, heard, hushed, set by, and look down the quiet seam you chalked at first light. Men carry their breath to the rail like it was a thing they were proud of not spilling. The king will get his day. The taxes will still be dull. Your job was to make dullness cheaper than chaos. Frost kisses the rail, thaw wakes under the rushes, ink goes sulky in the well, and pretends the morning can't start without it. You warm wax for a stiff hush strap between thumb and forefinger until it remembers to be useful. Nick a clogged quill for the tally until the nib sighs into duty, then heel test yesterday's seam. It lies politely, top firm, under soft. The hall intends to be both treacherous and reasonable. At the gate, a market man rents his throat to a rumor. Captains sit close and fathers stand far and pay. He tries it 3 ways to learn which sells best. The warden doesn't argue. He lays his palm on the bench cord so quiet looks nailed down. "Warden's peace at the cordon," he says. Then to you, orders that make your wrists honest. Demonstration without spectacle. Move the cord in the open. First case at the novice rail. Chalk fresh on the board. Firm here, danger there. No yawns at court where boots must see it. From the chapel door the sacrist adds what your shoulders already knew. No clatter. Mass. Your morning becomes a shuttle of small courtesies. Bench cord, dais rail, fines table. Back and forth until the rushes decide they are being watched. You cradle spare mint under canvas so it doesn't look like theater. You peg where the frost stayed loyal, ease where the thaw began to lie. Stamp the seam yourself so the first boot won't be surprised. You pull the wool cord out in a shallow arc and pin it straight in public. Geometry calms men faster than speeches. Then the choice that buys you critics either way. Post the chord shift first. Clean, visible, arithmetic. And townsmen cry favoritism, see, captains get firm, fathers get far. Post the rotation list first. Needier, fair, and the Chamberlain fumes. You're teaching people their place matters more than their form. Meanwhile, if a passerby spies blue thread oath staves, he'll shout cheat instead of rule. So you pick your order. Path first, promise second. Cord moved in the open, peg taps, cord hums. Chalk rings down the seam. Rotation posted immediately after. Near benches, far benches, yellow water paws where it belongs. Blue thread staves hang last, in daylight, under a strip that says oath answers after water. A clerk from the captain's table arrives with a rota torn down the spine by a thumb that wanted to be a palm. Paste, thread, the little iron he keeps under his cuff against 6 rules and a superstition. You hold a corner while he stitches the day back together. The sacrist glances over when the iron thinks about performing. No clatter, he murmurs, and the iron learns to whisper. The hush horn peals its low mark. Peg taps quiet themselves. The warden keeps his hand on the rope but does not pull. He lends it patience, not weight. You chalk the public board by the bar, firm here, danger there, in a hand that refuses drama. Under it 2 columns the council learned to love last tide, matters heard and strays arrested, words over the line. Ticks, 2 underheard, novice rail first, widow's plea begun. 1 under strays. Orm sighed across the seam and met the staff rap for measure kept. You hang the ban where boots have to see it to sit. No yawns a tea court. Someone opens his mouth to say yawns are honest. You point at the fines table, vinegar coins stacked like patience. And at the mint, the rumor loses customers. A boy at the near bench sags at the hush, breath getting ahead of courage. You steady his elbow with your sleeve and tap his shoulder twice. Set feet. Breathe. Speak. You lend him the pocket drill in a seam meant for quiet, not heroics. He nods at the chalk ring 2 paces back and forgives his own throat. Blue thread oath staves whisper from the rack like temptation. You leave them where law said, last in line under witnesses in daylight. A passerby opens his mouth for cheat. Rule, you say without moving your teeth, and the arithmetic supports you. The mint turns into policy rather than pity. Dry mouths get sprigs, then silence, The fines book gets a sensible column, mint issued. So the vinegar coins buy courtesy twice. You keep one sprig under the plank for the page with linen cuffs who still thinks size or punctuation. 2 benches try to trade places. Habit outruns instruction. You redress the ring in shadow while a lantern crawls closer, a sleeve tug, a palm down, a quiet hold for the one who thinks volume counts as measure. The cord stays true. The tide of cases keeps pretending it planned this. The market man circles again and tests his line about captains close, fathers far. You let him see the cord shift he watched happen and the rotation names posted underneath. You say nothing. Demonstration without spectacle does the talking. The council bell lifts a hush even the gulls respect. You read the board aloud for the edge of the crowd that pretends letters are for other men. Firm here, danger there, matters heard. 2. Strays arrested. 1. Shorties for good order at mid-bell. No yawns at court here. A herald's trumpet slices rising talk into pieces too small to hire. The chamberlain flicks his eyes from cord to rota to blue staves hung in daylight and decides, visibly, not to be angry. A priest catches chalk sigils blooming on the rail and says, "No charms. Device, not charm, you note in your book and wipe the marks off with vinegar." Rosemary makes the woods smell like restraint. The apothecary shuffles along the aisle selling a sentence. Peas and felt save bowels, mint saves mouths, and this once he's right enough to be tolerated. By mid-morning, the proof looks like furniture. Cord where eyes watched it be moved. First plea heard at the novice rail. Ban painted where boots must see it. The board says firm here, danger there, and nobody pretends not to read. The hush horn peals again. Men speak. The line decides to behave. If it were your hour, if the warden ordered demonstration without spectacle, what posts first, cord first or rotation first? Put it and where you're watching from below. I read them when the wax stops sulking and the cord asks to be pegged again. Torches gutter and make the hall look smaller than it was at noon. Gates bar with that elbow-deep clunk that ends the day whether anyone agrees. Word keeps its own hours and hires a chorus as it slips past the cord. Blind counts, favored cord. The square likes a rhyme when it thinks it was cheated of a nearer seat. Inside, the hall meets by candle to do what halls are for, turn mockery into policy. The beadle taps your plank twice with a stick that believes it writes law. Copy fair, copy fast, flawless, you square the sheet. The quill behaves because your hand has learned not to consult your feelings. Public notice, quiet passage to and from the cord. You write it where boots must read before mouths can improvise. Fines, called alms to keep peace with ears, for broken pegs and barred boasts. Novice bench dressed first. On paper, orders to post days range, wind, and water pause at dawn, so rumor wakes up unemployed. You leave small doors the town needs to breathe, save collapse, save fever, save order under strain. Sand hisses. The line goes matte. Before it dries, a flare blooms in the shed. Orange climbs faster than sense. You and 2 boys are already moving. Buckets find your hands as if they were born there. Wet wool hisses on embered planks. The line at the outer bar forgets its lyrics long enough to watch flame learn manners. Rosemary and vinegar go back to their quieter work of smelling like discipline. Back at the plank, the beetle plants a knuckle in your margin. A small slip slides under your thumb with the practiced innocence of a profitable sin. Keep this quiet, the neat hand says. You tuck it under the ledger and rest your palm until paper remembers filing is a kind of death. Omit it forever, your bone tells your nerve sits. A coin rings on your plank and refuses to shine. The dead carrier's sister stands with shoulders like broom handles and a voice built to carry 5 words. Save the sick from far marks. Not loud, truer than the jeer outside. You point your pen at the clause that teaches exceptions not to breed and write what the hall needed to learn. Sick and novice on close cord in foul wind, far only on clear. The beetle coughs at the line that will cost him a friend. You keep the curve of the S steady as if dignity could be written into vowels. Under the guest loft, a trap yawns. Men step down with private purses and come up with lighter pockets and better stories. Extra pegs, extra staves. A porter has discovered he likes counting with his palm. You lift the hatch with a peg just enough to count and close it on a promise your shoulder can pay for in the morning. 2 more pegs gone than posted. 2 fewer staves returned than sworn. The cellarer's hand lands on your shoulder with the weight of a nail. Make it wood, his thumb says. You nod. Boards can learn policy. You carry the fresh notice to the bar. Key rings stacked like teeth on the bailiff's belt chatter when the cartwheel squeals its old grievance, and then purrs after someone shames it with grease. You nail the paper where hands can't pretend they weren't told. A drum under the board gives the words a spine. Suspense settles behind you like a gull. If the jeers aren't answered, the outer bar will try to be a song. If you answer wrong, your name slides onto the stone the clerk keeps oiled, to be silenced. Either way, the queue of cases won't wait. Tomorrow's dawn needs a script more than you need applause. Inside, tallies of peg immersements line up under your pencil. Recognizances with awkward crosses shiver into the docket. Some firm, some sideways, some made by hands that prefer tools to pens. Rosemary and vinegar steam lift the room's patience a half-inch. The astrologer drifts in, declares the hour lucky if men stop talking, then pushes the lucky hour forward with his thumb when clouds thicken. Nobody pays him. He pretends the sky did. A patron's runner offers a folded chit with wax that confuses polish for law. Open by order, it claims. Chin high at your margin. You lay it under the same palm that smothered the beetle's slip, and let paper learn to die politely. Now the contested name. It warms your pocket like a small stove. A lord whose cousin stands too often with the steward under the arch expects the close chord rotation as if it were inheritance. He doesn't belong there. Another name does, the oar hand whose water paws steadied 3 benches, the widow whose petition taught the tiny king to listen yesterday. Erase or obey. Unlock or relock. You lay the bad name on the plank over the rosemary tack and let friction pretend to be fate. You set him aside. You write the other in a hand the hall has learned to trust and punish. Your handwriting is where mercy lives. The company will teach you later what it costs to be recognized by your letters. The beetle's cough finally locates the line that will make him defend you to men who look like his friends. The warden signs with the letter that doesn't blush. The chamberlain scans the page, prefers arithmetic to adjectives, and nods toward the board. A friar palms you a chit from the alderman. You let him watch you file it in the drawer where paper goes to learn that patience is fatal. You return to the trap and ask the dark for arithmetic. Extra pegs? Extra staves? The porter's smile loses a tooth. You count again. 2 more gone than posted. 2 fewer returned than sworn. The cellarer's thumb presses your shoulder like a promise with hardware. Make it wood. You nod. Morning will learn carpentry. The outer bar leans again, and a herald's trumpet cuts the sound into obedient pieces. You read the notice aloud because policy grows up when it hears itself. Quiet passage, fines for broken pegs and barred boasts. Novice bench dressed first. Range, wind, and water pause at dawn. The market man tests favored chord one last time and watches the board ignore him like old wood ignores adjectives. You knot the notice where the drum can keep it company. You file the coin in the dish that will be the only place tonight where money does what it's told. You file the chits in the drawer that kills them softly. You leave the contested name where rosemary can keep it from sticking to your hand again. You bank the brazier, torches gutter, gates bar. The hall smells like ink that decided to be honest and smoke that learned restraint. Outside, a town is learning quiet rules by cord and chalk instead of yawning. That is the price of silence on paper, and the tide will keep the bargain. If it were your plank, if a sister's coin rang dull where your sand still dried, if a patron's slip asked your margin to forget itself, if a name in your pocket insisted on warmth it hadn't earned, what would you write, omit or obey? Put it in where you're watching from below. I read them when the wax flakes from my fingers and the cord asks whether it belongs on the rushes again. Dawn unlatches the hall. Trumpets wet their lips, drums find yesterday's beat and hand it back to a room that hasn't earned music yet. The velvet voice climbs its crate by the bar and nails the hour to the cord. His Grace commends those who kept quiet order on the cord. Ranges are chalked because a bargain in ink said they must. Windows stand open not from virtue, but because a rule learned how to turn air into policy. The brazier glows the way a good tool glows, only because the order allowed it. not because anyone needs to admire it. The market man with the myth strides past the fence free as air, trying a new sentence on the light and deciding to save it for a paying crowd. A midwife's lintel wears a yellow tag instead of red. Someone wrote the exception, and someone else obeyed it. Near the steps, a widow folds to the cobbles. Two strangers make a chair of their hands and lift her as if the town had rehearsed it, which it has. The velvet voice finishes the page. People accept being commended because it costs them nothing at this hour. Your errands carry edges. You are final witness and courier of consequences. First duplicate to the warden, quiet passage to and from the cord, fines called alms to keep peace with ears for broken pegs and barred boasts. Novice bench dressed first, day's range, wind, and waterpaws to be posted at dawn. He signs with a letter that doesn't blush and gives you the small look you've been earning all week. I saw. Second to the captain, the dry rota, the seam stitched by the clerk's little iron, the tally, matters heard, strays arrested. Arithmetic she prefers to adjectives. She nods and spares you both a speech. Third to the guild, hung where money pretends to learn manners, a snowfall of paper that settles dust without cleaning blood. Over yesterday's shut-ups for false oath, a muster sheet for the king's levy is pinned, wide as appetite. Names bud at the lower edge where pride and debt keep their appointment. You finally understand what yawns find and pain band bought. Not glamour, but obedience. Not luxury, but lanes that move, bellies steady, cases and boats that leave on time. And a harvest of men promised for later, because a straight cord is useful to more than courts. The dry rota hangs over the board. Close cord, far cord, dry strap first, with the calm you wished for last week. Vinegar coins clink in ladles at the chest, chests of fines groan into carts and purr after somebody shames the wheels with grease. A parchment marked misadventure for a slip at wet flags goes into the docket, a lie with a warm heart that keeps the morning cheap. The last rosemary bundle smolders to ash on the brick. The priest who warned off charms chalked on rail watches it die and decides to respect devices publicly for a week. Then your coat remembers it has a drawer. The secret slate of spared rotations. The three lords who didn't take their water paws because you decided luck owed them interest. The side list of chords you tightened against orders in the cold hour when thaw lied beneath frost and sense outranked command. Leak, burn, or file, you hold both like hot bread. Leak would be honest and brief. You would be too. It would splash in the square like a good sin and die when nobody could afford to adopt it. Burn would be quick and teach you nothing but how to run colder. File is the story this corner survives by, proof where questions with hats can find it. Nowhere near mouths with errands. You slide slate and list into the drawer under the ledger, and listen for the click that promises a better hour will be allowed to ask you why. File. The steward finds you the way enamel always does. He offers a badge to mark more wisely, as if clarity were a party trick you refuse to perform. The guildmaster occupies the shade near your shoulder and offers sanctuary till the pest passes, the sort of dangerous kindness that fits under a cloak. The warden passes and gives you what he does best in your direction, not nothing, not much. I saw. You answer all three with what you own. Keys, cord, brazier. Silence. Here, your wrists say, you keep your post. Public reading by the bar begins again because velvet likes threes. The drum puts a spine under the notice. The captain's clerk flits in to finger the knot on the rota, decides it will hold, and vanishes before the market man can hire his breath. The sacrist rubs his palm along the church door and decides the wood can keep quiet without supervision. The cellarer hisses move at a shadow out of habit. A runner from the alderman tries you with a new chit. Open by order, the wax whispers in a humbler tone than yesterday's. You rest it under your palm and let your hand decide. Omit. You chalk a dot on your wrist to remind yourself who deserves your braver voice later, the novice whose lane you dressed in sleet, the oar hand whose cord you tightened against orders. Rules are supposed to keep people alive, not busy. If you had to choose, soft under a patron's livery or hard under sanctuary eaves, what keeps you whole, livery or sanctuary? Put it in where you're watching from below. I count them after the last wax flake leaves my fingers and the cord asks whether it belongs on the rushes again. By noon, the extracts have turned into furniture. People lean on them and forget when paper had to prove itself. The levy clerk learns to keep his line moving without explaining his face. The market man tests a fresh myth and discovers grief has better ears than appetite. The board holds, the cord stays true, the line breathes without you needing to give it a mouth. Justice this week was airflow and cord budget. Mercy was policy, not indulgence. Survival was choreography of chalk, pegs, ring, and staves, performed by people who don't need to be sung about to do it again. You were the hinge, you coil the slack, you pocket the keys, you bank the brazier. The horn will say mark, the hush horn will say hush, and the cord will mean speak. The tide will keep its bargain if you keep yours.